Okay. Well, hello. My name is Silvester Henderson, and I am professor of music at Los Alamos College, and I'm also owner of a company entitled Professor for Life Incorporated. And I am so honored and grateful this early afternoon to interview a wonderful academic by the name of Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar. And we're going to just kind of welcome Dr. Ogbar to our digital community that we share these interviews with all around the world. And I'm grateful, Dr. Ogbar, for you taking the time to come and then to kind of talk about your journey. So, first of all, I want to say welcome and thank you once again for taking the time to be here.
Professor Henderson, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. I know that we've, of course, known each other now for about a year or so, a little bit more. I had colleagues who, for years, pronounced my last name the way you did, so don't feel bad. I actually had to put it on my Zoom call with a long O, so you see my name, Ogbar. But I have colleagues who will call me Ogbar for years.
Okay.
So I'm not for the record. Yeah, so it's a long O, Ogbar, like Obama.
Well, look at me as the senior, so I'm going to remember Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to correct that. We have just a couple of questions I would like to ask you. First of all, I would like to ask you to describe your work and obligations as a full professor of history and African-American studies at the University of Connecticut, and kind of tell us what sort of classes do you teach and what does it involve to work as a full professor?
So for people who are unfamiliar with the ranking and ranks of academics, professors of the different ranks, there is the instructor is someone who does not have a terminal degree who teaches. You have adjuncts who might have a terminal degree but not a full-time, we call it tenure track job. Then there are people who have a terminal degree, so a PhD, an MD, a JD, an MFA, who are tenure track professors. They're assistant professors on their way towards tenure. And then after 6 years, typically at an institution, one comes up for tenure and gets promoted to associate professor. So you have be a tenured professor, associate professor. And then others, some people retire as associates, but many people, after at least 6 years, they go up for another promotion. They become a full professor, as you were mentioning, Professor Henderson. So yeah, as a full professor, my work isn't that different in the classroom from what I did as an assistant or an associate professor. My involvement in the machinations of the university increases in some respect because certain committees I might be on, certain committees I might head, are contingent upon my rank as a full professor. Certainly when it comes to promotion, tenure review committees, that kind of thing. Your invitation to review dossiers for other people who are coming up for tenure at other universities as external readers for books and all kind of things. So your rank does give you exposure to it widens your exposure to the service you often do and engage in at the university and beyond. And but yeah, my courses are African American history since 1865, the second half of African American history. I teach the second half of U.S. history since 1877. I teach a course on hip hop that is now now it's the oldest continuously taught course at a university on hip hop in the United States. It used to be the second oldest, but the person who taught the oldest one has retired. Portia Mosby, I'm sure you know about it, Indiana University, who's a prominent music scholar. So Portia Mosby retired a few years ago and elevated our class at UConn as the oldest continuously taught course on hip hop at a university. And these courses are taught all across the country, from Harvard, Howard, Morehouse, UCLA, you name the university, they often have a course on hip hop in different disciplines. I'm a historian, but there are people who are philosophers, sociologists, political scientists, all sorts of people who construct these courses.
That's one of the wonderful things that I've noticed about working in the university community, as opposed to, I worked only in the university community as a lecturer. This is many, many years ago. I did for 20 years. But working as a full professor at the university community, it seems as though your expertise and your doctorate degree gives you skills to expand your teaching pedagogy to other subjects that interlock and interrelate to one another. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a certain amount of I don't say elasticity. It's probably not the right word. A certain amount of space that one has in our department at UConn to explore topics to teach. And you can come up with we have a special topics course, a variable topics course. You can come up with a class that is not a full-fledged class that will be on the books in perpetuity, but you can come up with an experimental class. And it might, people have come up with courses on my hip hop class, started off as a special topics course that I taught for, I think, 3 years before it was a full-fledged, regular offering. And it has to be vetted and that kind of thing through committees and assessments of different sorts. But yeah, I've never felt constricted, in terms of what I could teach. I'm not going to go out and go off on a limb and teach something that I'm not trained to teach, So I can't, teach a course on ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, although I'm a historian, that's not my lane. So we leave that to the people who are specialists in those fields in terms of maintaining the integrity for those courses. But believe it or not, I know it may be kind of hard to believe, there's no rule against my teaching a course like that in the history department. So in our department, any historian can teach any course, theoretically. We don't just go out and start teaching classes that are outside our area of specialization, though. So we don't do it as a practice.
So what are some of the benefits, challenges, and similarities that you find when you're teaching U.S. history versus African American history, and also how you sort of have your popular music hip hop courses that you teach? Do you find them all to be quite different? I know they're quite different in terms of the subject, but are there some similarities and differences in those three areas?
Yeah, if I start with the U.S. history course, it's a gen ed class. It's a very large, currently in the way in which I teach it, it's a large lecture, 200 students. It starts off in the beginning of the year with about 200 students. And so like you see in TV shows and movies, sometimes you have this really big sort of stadium lecture course. And a lot of the students are there not because they're passionate about the subject, but it's an obligated course. They have to take it. So they're not, they're in it to just kind of push through it and that kind of thing. So some of them will be very passionate. Some will end the class saying it's their best class ever. I've had students tell me that I'm in the reviews, I'm their best professor ever, or one of the best professors. I have students who are like, I hate this man. I hate this course. It's good at everything, right?
We all have those.
Yeah. So I've gotten the whole gamut. And the U.S. history course, I feel, has kind of been like almost like the political landscape in the United States in the last, few presidential cycles, where you get like 50% of the people think that Trump is the best president in the history of the world. Others think he's the worst president ever. And it's really kind of fascinating that you have these sort of really diametrically opposed positions around the same thing. But so that's my U.S. history course. My African American history class, people opt to take it. It's not an obligated course, right? So people choose to take it. They kind of come in often with an expectation they're curious about the subject matter. They've gone out their way to take the class. So you have students who are curious about it. Some people are like, well, I need a history course and this looks interesting. Some people, I want this particular history on African Americans. I find this fascinating. And I have students who run the gamut, completely dedicated, very like the U.S. history course, very dedicated, really fascinated about the subject matter and dedicated to the class, and others who are disengaged. And I have to say the same thing for the hip hop class. The hip hop class all three courses have evolved since the pandemic. I think that, and this is, I suspect, your situation there, but all across the United States, I've read articles. The Chronicle of Higher Education has written about students since the pandemic, high absentee rates, a lot of students just not coming to class. You have a lot more students who just don't, their academic preparation, writing skills have diminished, partly because of, just the ways that high school had to adjust for the pandemic. In between 2020 and 2022, a lot of Zoom, the standards have diminished. And so I do get students, and all of my colleagues I talk to at UConn and colleagues everywhere else, they all say the same thing, that they've had challenges with students that sort of declining quality of their preparedness, and also the degree to which they come to class all the time. And we've had classes. We've been talking about this at UConn, like on the dean level and department level, and the provost level, actually, about how do we hit a restart and get students to be much more engaged. And that's unfortunate because the students are, for whatever reason, they think it's fun or cool or normative not to come to class. And most are probably there, but you might get a third of them at any given day, 40% just not come to class. And it's really unfortunate. But that's why I've experienced some disengagement lately.
Wow.
But you always have these really fascinating, really dedicated students too.
That is a perspective that is just not part of the university, but the California Community College system, which is one of the largest systems in higher education in the world, is the largest. It's all over our system with our 1.8 million students. I mean, I have classes now where students will sign up. You'll have 40 students and only 25 of them are engaged.
Yeah.
And regardless of how you email them, call them, and what have you, but that's another topic for conversation because I think that the world of higher education, the landscape, I should say, of higher education is going to really have to revisit that topic because that is a real large concern on a national level. You know what? Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. I'm off.
No. I was just going to say that. So I appreciate hearing that perspective from such a well-received, I would say, academic as yourself, because for one time I thought, well, maybe this is only the problem with the community colleges, but I'm finding that it's not. It's the problem with the community colleges and the university community.
Yeah, I talked to a colleague I've talked to many colleagues about this, and when one at UConn was saying that he thinks that there's a sense of a culture that's been forged where, at least for our students, they think it's just cool to be disengaged. Like part of coming to college is that you're too cool for school now, like you're too cool for class, and I can just come in for what the quizzes are, dip in for a lecture every now and then when I feel like it, and then come take the exams. And I think that for most, and this is a statistical fact, right? So most people across the country don't go on to become physicians, lawyers, PhDs, or MBAs. So for a lot of students at UConn, they're really not concerned about coming out with a competitive GPA. And we have fantastic students here, don't get me wrong. We have been a top 25 public university, right? So we have 4,000, institutions of higher learning in the United States. And hundreds, if not, maybe well over 1,000 public institutions of some sort. But to be in the top 25 is a pretty big deal. We got as high as 18 one year, right? So we're not getting students that are not prepared. But the facts on the ground are that most UConn students in 6 years aren't in post-grad study. So a lot of my students are happy they come to get a college degree, and they're not trying to go to a competitive law school or even a non-competitive law school. They're not trying to get into an elite PhD program, or a mediocre PhD program. So for them, coming out with a GPA that's a 2.6, they got a degree from UConn, and so I think that a lot. Yeah, so I mean that's all they're kind of going for. So I think I told my students that a lot of people, though, when it gets to be 30, they might think, hey, it would be good to go back and get an advanced degree. I might want to get an MBA. I didn't think about law school before, but I might want to be an attorney. And you have fully the capacity to do it. You're like really smart kids, but you came out with a 2.6 because you were trying to be cool, and it's just such a waste. You can't go back and all of a sudden, increase that GPA to something that's competitive to get into a very good program. So I have friends who teach at other schools, like at Morehouse and Spelman. And most Morehouse students, most Spelman students in 6 years have gotten an advanced degree or enrolled in a program. So for them, the GPA is more important. You have more students who are engaged. These are private schools, so you could also require them you can punish them if they don't come to class. You can actually put that into their grade. So we don't do that at UConn. We can't require them to come to class. We can't penalize them if they miss over 3 classes, but you can do that at some schools. So anyway, there are all these things. I don't have an answer for how you could do a hard restart because, and the other thing is, I'm sounding like an old curmudgeon, so I'll stop right now. And we can talk about some other stuff.
Okay, well, you know what? We're going to have to invite you back with a panel of professionals to really discuss this topic because this is a fascinating topic. But in any regard, the next question, tell me how has history influenced the world of popular music and innovative research for you?
Hmm. How has my discipline influenced? I'm sorry.
Research? Okay, how
Okay.
has history influenced the world of popular music, and especially in regards to you doing research and innovative research in particular?
So it's interesting because as someone who's been trained to think as a historian, I've I've thought about the world through the lens of a historian for so long. Actually, now more than half my life, right? That I when I think about studying music, someone who might be an ethnomusicologist or someone who's a musician might not quite approach the exploration of music in the same way I do. Like I'm always thinking about historical context for the development of music. So when I think about, for example, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," I can't help but engage that historical moment of the early 1970s that give rise, like all those things that give rise to Marvin Gaye's social, political, cultural worldview to create a song like "What's Going On." And so for me, I quote Angela Davis here, who says that great music doesn't come out of the vacuum, but to understand that great music is to understand the social historical moment that inspired the artist to create that music. So we really appreciate someone like Marvin Gaye's engagement with the Black freedom movement and also the environmental challenges. Even when he talks about the environment in the song "Ecology" off the album, "What's Going On," it came out in 1971. Before the EPA was created, and with pressure to the federal government to do something about environmental pollutants in the air, soil, and water. And he's talking about all these things. He's talking about Vietnam. He's talking about police brutality. He's talking about pollution. He's talking about all these different forces. And for me as a historian, when I engage in popular music, my hip hop class is a history course. So I always remind my students that when we talk about music, we're talking about historical moments, and we talk about historical moments that inspired anyone, right? So obviously someone like Billie Holiday's "Strange Fruit," but what does it mean that you have two white Jewish people who create the lyrics for "Strange Fruit," right, in New York City, and that this African-American woman decides to put her own career on the chopping block to sing the lyrics to the song? And we think about this superstructure of hatred that would try to undermine her career because she's talking about the horrors of lynching, right? And so there's so much to explore in pop music and history. So for me, when I look at music, I can't just, but I suspect maybe a musicologist, I don't know, I'm getting out of my lane here, I might sound real ignorant, but I think that a musicologist could explore all of these artists, Sam Cooke, and A Change Is Going to Come, and see certain things musically and maybe in ways that I do not. And they might actually look at some of the innovation and some of the production elements that I wouldn't necessarily consider. There might be some, like there's a rapper, Rakim, who said that what inspired him as an MC was that he was a jazz artist first. And he said that he played the saxophone, and he read about people who played the saxophone. He read about John Coltrane. He heard that John Coltrane uniquely could play two notes at the same time, which people thought to be impossible. So he said, if John Coltrane could do something with the saxophone that people hadn't done before, maybe I could do something lyrically that people never thought a rapper could do before. And therefore, he raised the bar lyrically. But I think when I think about him as a musician, he's not thinking about the historical world of John Coltrane. He's looking at the musical techniques of John Coltrane, right? And that's something I don't often do. Follow me? So I think that there are different approaches to music, and as a historian, I'm looking at a very historical lens, not the sort of technical approaches to it.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about music from the perspective of how it supports political change and how sometimes it describes political change.
Yes, some of that, and then some of it not, right? Like I do exactly that, but also look at something I didn't do 20 years ago when I taught the class back then. but I actually look at things like love. Like I never looked at love. I have a whole section on love now. I have a whole section on spirituality and religion. I never had those sorts of things. I actually look at different types of love, like agape, philia, storge, eros. I look at these different Greek concepts of love, and they're not tied to social political movements necessarily, but they help illuminate so much about the human condition and the ways in which rap music itself is so discursive, but it talks about everything under the sun, including love. And this thing is that people who are often have a pedestrian familiarity with hip hop don't think that hip hop has emotional sophistication to talk about the complexities of love, but it does. And even artists that aren't like someone like J. Cole is an easy one, or someone like Big Sean, or someone like Kendrick Lamar. We also have Jay-Z, right? And Jay-Z is a gangster. He's killed a whole bunch of people in his lyrics and talked about selling crack and all that, being a gangster and a thug. But he's also talked about love, right? He's talked about love for his mama, love for a man, like his a platonic love for his one of his best friends, saying that he will die for him, right? That he will do anything he could for him, that he loved for a woman, right? And so the absence of love and how that makes his life incomplete. And so it's really kind of interesting just how common it is for rappers of every stripe, whether they're, someone like Chance the Rapper, to someone like Jay-Z, to someone who's a so-called like woke conscious rapper, everyone in between. The exploration of love is something that's very, very common. So I really enjoy some of those things that I did not look at before. So I'm maturing, and as an instructor for the course, I've actually tried to become a little broader in how I explore the subject matter. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I like that because that takes us into another topic, but it also kind of talks a little bit about, it starts looking at religion and philosophy and, how folks view their own personal perspectives and who influenced them. I would like to ask you, who kind of influenced you, or do you have anyone that really influenced you in your academic journey as a professor, especially as a historian, as a Black historian, African-American historian?
Yeah, I would say there were a whole bunch of people. When I was an undergrad, I went to Morehouse College, and the history department had most of the faculty members were Black, and the chair of the history department was a mentor, Dr. Alton Hornsby, and there was a really effective teacher named Dr. Marcellus Barksdale, who was just a very mature, high water example of pedagogy, right? He was a very effective teacher, and he balanced humor and respect for him in the classroom and high standards too, and you have fun and you learn. And I've always tried to approximate his teaching skills and style, but I've never been able to do it. He's been very masterful in that way. But in terms of an academic, as a researcher, I remember being inspired and being fascinated by certain books, and Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is something I read in undergrad, and it was a very enlightening book. Of course, Du Bois although Du Bois is such a giant, and he's someone is probably the historian I admire the most, period. I wasn't reading a lot of Du Bois in undergrad, and I think Souls of Black Folk may have been the only book that I read in undergrad from Du Bois. But I would say that Walter Rodney, who was a Guyanese historian and a Black Power advocate, was someone I think who inspired me. And then Manny Marable, who did How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, and it was inspired by Walter Rodney's seminal, and canonical book. So I would say that in Vincent Harding's There Is a River is another one I remember being very inspired by. These are, some really good historians. And then as I went into hip hop and started doing stuff around it, nobody, there were no classes on hip hop, right? And when I started, and I mean, none that I had been exposed to, so none in graduate school that I ever took, none in undergrad. And I never, I can't say I had any kind of models of sorts, but there were people who were starting to teach classes on hip hop, and I started mine in the late 90s. And Yeah, so I don't really, I can't have a model in that respect. But I remember reading, like quoting Angela Davis there. I know that Angela Davis talked about blues, and that's where that quote comes from, her examination of women in the blues and how we understand that.
Wow. I remember having Angela Davis many years ago as a professor at
Oh wow,
State
you had Angela
University.
Davis as a professor.
I sure did.
Wow, this is at was it
At
Santa
San
Cruz?
Francisco State University.
Wow,
Many, many years ago.
wow, that's fantastic.
Yes, I had her. She was wonderful.
Oh my God, I bet she was.
Yeah,
Wow.
she was wonderful. I
So
had
you
her.
were just introduced. You're seeing brilliance every time you came in the classroom, huh?
That's right. Yes. Can you kind of describe your Center for the Study of Popular Music, and what are some of the functions of this particular entity within the university? What are some of the good things that it's done, and how does it really support students of color in general?
Hmm. Great question. So the Center for the Study of Popular Music was founded in 2014, and before that I was the chief diversity officer at the university, and I was returning to faculty, and I wanted to have, this is after 9 years of some level of administration. I've been the head of African American Studies for 6 years. Um, let's see, I was associate dean for 3 years, I guess more than 9 years, and then a couple years as vice provost for diversity. So I spent all these years in some level of administration, and I wanted to come back to faculty, but I wanted to have some hand in some light administration, right? Nothing major, but if I could help contribute to the richness of the university in some way. And I thought that the center would be a wonderful way to bring together a number of forces at the university that were engaged in work around popular music. So it turns out that we have faculty members in different schools and colleges at the university who were teaching courses related to pop music, who had no idea that there were other colleagues doing this in different schools and colleges. So we have people in the NEAC School of Education who were teaching courses. We have the School of Fine Arts and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So we were able to bring people together so folks could be aware of the sort of work being done by their colleagues. We have repositories on campus dedicated to music, the Salmon and Charters collection of music. We have a punk music collection. We have stuff on blues and jazz and rock. We have, I've been able to bring in at least once a semester, there's an event that we do. And we're a very small center, by the way. So we're not like a big unit, but we have at least one event a semester. And we've had artists in residence 1 year. That was June Archer, who is June Archer used to be in a band back in the 90s, but had a top 40 song. He was in a group called Room Service. And then he became an A&R and started to work in behind the scenes of the music industry and has become an executive of different sorts. And he was a wonderful artist in residence for a calendar year. We had another person who was a scholar in residence for a year, Grammy nominated songwriter and musician named Yash. He has two different names. Ronnie Song is his stage name, so we'll just call him Ronnie Song. And he came and did a wonderful job. He's spoken in multiple classes. He gave his own public presentation. He emceed an event we had with Mark Anthony Neal, who's a professor at Duke University, who began one of our lecture series in the fall of 15. So we've had speakers talk about everything from Native Americans in rock and roll to Black women and sexuality in the blues to Beyonce and feminism. We've had music on barbecue. Last semester, we had someone who did something on barbecue and country music and race. And so we've had all sorts of really intriguing presentations that have drawn folks in from around campus. And so, we had finally some hip hop people, and I think it was fall of 18 or 19. We had one of my favorite groups from back in the day, Brand Nubian. We had Lord Jamar from Brand Nubian, and one of my favorite Connecticut rappers, probably my favorite Connecticut rapper, period. Certainly one of them is Apathy, who came and gave a talk with him, and fantastic talk, standing room only. So the topics have ranged from across the board in all sorts of things dealing with music. Students come through. We try to connect some students to some internships with June Archer, the executive, right, who came and spoke to students about the music industry and their involvement. So that's been it, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, have you had a chance? Do you engage at all with because I'm a religious music expert, so I'm just curious. Have you engaged at all with any folk, African American folk, religious music, spirituals, gospel, what have you, which is kind of like the father of all American popular music. So I'm curious to see, have your center considered that, or would you consider that?
We certainly would consider it. We have not yet. We've had blues, jazz, rock and roll, country music, hip hop. We actually had something on disco, and we have not had any. It's a trip. We've covered probably every genre of American music.
Now, I was listening for that.
yeah. But so I guess it's about time for us to get around it. It took a long time. It took years before we did something on hip hop. I think that people were thinking the center was supposed to be about hip hop because this is what I do, but it was actually years went by before we actually did something on hip hop. But we certainly should do something on religious music. I don't think we've done anything on religious music.
Faith-based music, African American gospel music, and higher education.
Yep.
Something such as that, or its place within society.
Yes.
So I just thought I'd put that out there.
Bring you out here. Yeah.
Listen, what would you consider to be one of your greatest creative accomplishments?
I would have to say it's my, like writing a book is like writing an academic book is very, very hard. It's a very, people don't get tenure because they don't do it, right? It can't, it's not, it's a very arduous task. And for me, like you're typically in our field in history at a Research One university, tenure means writing an academic book with an academic press and doing some articles, and evidence of a second project is usually the standard at a Research One university. And that first book is based on your dissertation almost all the time. But that second, and so that's hard itself, right? Writing your dissertation is hard, and then creating that dissertation and moving into a book is hard. The second book, which started from scratch, without the advisor, without the structure of a dissertation committee, without the review committee and all that, it actually is a lot of work and it's very hard. Going to archives, traveling, trying to get funding, all that takes years and years to do. And but when you make this scholarly contribution, you're doing something that expands our understanding about a particular topic, and hopefully in meaningful ways, that you're enlightening the world in some little facet, right? The vast majority of people aren't going to read your work, but there's a small little pocket of folks who will understand a phenomenon in ways it's never been explored before. And that's the point of a dissertation, the point of something, a genuinely unique, new inquiry into phenomena. And I would have to say that for me, my measure would be the books that I've created. And I wouldn't say that the two monographs I have, Hip Hop Revolution and the other is Black Power, those two books, I wouldn't, just like having children, like you want to say you don't have one as a favorite, but I would say that those two books are the ones that when I go to conferences and people say that they've enjoyed those books, I find that very meaningful. I don't get rich from that kind of stuff, but it's very rewarding when someone sends me an email or they stop me at a conference to say that, or I'm reading someone's acknowledgments and they're saying that Jeffrey Ogbar, is an important, person whose work has shaped my scholarship. That kind of stuff is rewarding in a way that, just very rewarding for me. And I get a lot out of that. Again, you don't get rich off of these academic books typically, right? But I would say that's my most rewarding part.
Well, you know what, Dr. Ogbar, I am so honored that my dear friend, young Professor Evan Wade, introduced me to you some time ago. And so I did a lot of research and reading about you. So I appreciate your work within the world of higher education, and especially your work within popular music and, all of your articles and things that you've written. So I look at it as an honor to interact with you. Listen, I have Just two or three more questions because I'm looking at the time and I'm being cognizant of your time for you. What challenges have you faced as a man of color in higher education? Or what are some of the challenges?
Yeah. That's a good question. So it's and this is probably not what people expect to hear. And I'm not one. It's interesting because anyone who knows me, they know I'm not a Clarence Thomas type of dude who's like, oh, racism doesn't exist. So I'm not one like that. I can actually give you a whole bunch of reams of data on all sorts of inequities in society. But I have to be honest, like my personal experience, I just have to be honest, right? My personal experience at where I teach at the University of Connecticut, I have not had colleagues, I've had the department, I've had deans I haven't had anyone try to undermine me or prevent me from writing. I've never had anyone tell me I couldn't write this, I couldn't explore that, I couldn't teach a class on this, I couldn't teach a class on that. I haven't had people block me from being on committees. If anything, I'm like trying to get off of stuff, I'm just being honest. I've had a really good experience at the University of Connecticut. My colleagues, I know people want me to be like, oh, these people be making my life miserable. I hate it. That hasn't been my experience, man. And I'm grateful that I've had very civilized colleagues. I've had people who've been good colleagues. And administratively, the university is not without its problems, like any university. But I can't say that those problems have been a consequence of me dealing with uncivilized, ignorant white supremacists who tried to make my life miserable. Like I haven't had that experience. And I'll be honest, man, like, outside of UConn, I mean, I go to conferences and I don't know what, I'm sure there are people who have, I was at a meeting one time on campus and someone said that this was a meeting of faculty of color, and there was a man who was who was getting a little emotional. He was saying that he had somebody who doubted that he was a professor. I don't know if this happened a lot of times or once or something, but he was getting like real emotional about it. And so I asked another guy after that meeting, I was like, you've had people say this to you? And he started saying that, it happened to him one time. I was like, when did it happen to you? When did someone doubt that you were a professor? And he was like, well, he started itching and scratching a little bit. He was like, well, one time I was at a Starbucks or something. And I was like, oh, okay. And so he said someone was surprised that he was a professor. But that's not enough to make me like start getting emotional about it. I know that some people have had experiences, but I have nothing for you, bro. I'm glad I don't. And if, I don't discount people's stories if they have those experiences. And we all know that white supremacy is real, racial oppression is real, all that kind of stuff. But I can't say that I personally have had that. But I'm curious about, your experience. You've been around the block, and I know you teach at a different university in a different state.
I've had a lot of positive. I've had a lot of challenges. But one of the things as I've aged, I realized is based on three things. One, your outlook, your personality, and being able to address things using positive language skills. And I find that when you can engage those three things, it can lessen some of the trouble that you will have. So to me, what I tell people, I wasn't always this wise. What I tell a lot of academics now is that remain a positive attitude. Don't allow the system to rob you of your perspectives. Two, just simply develop a great personality where people want to respect you and be a skill master at what you do. Because when you are a skill master at what you do, people are so many times enthralled by who you are as a person, what you say becomes secondary because they're so enthralled by that's been my experience. And then finally, to be very well spoken. I'm known for a guy who speaks through parables a lot. And that's one of the ways I've been able to engage with so many millions of people nationally by those three principles. So having said that, can you tell me what are some, I just got two other questions. I'm looking at the clock. I got 9 minutes. Can you tell me what are some of the things that you feel that you do personally to improve outcomes for, in particular, men of color? You hear me talk about that a lot because I believe that African American men, especially men of color, is a sort of a lost species within higher education, and that I am constantly, my world is to support and to love everyone, but I have a very large passion inside of me to always support men of color.
Yeah. So in 2012, I was named the Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Connecticut and Vice Provost for Diversity. And so one of the things I did when I got the position was to look at the data. UConn promoted itself and was quite proud of the graduation and retention rates of what it defined as minority students. But what I did was disaggregate these data in a way that no one had ever done before, looking at not just white students and minority students, but looking at white students and then taking the groups of color, the students of color, and disaggregating them by gender. So we had whites, blacks, Asians, and Latinos, males and females. So then we have 8 demographic groups, and we were able to look at what their graduation rates were instead of just putting, them into these just 2 halves. So we got a chance to see the outcomes were very different depending on gender, more than anything when it came to black and Latino male students. It turns out that in 2002, we had a graduation rate for black women that actually slightly exceeded white males. But the graduation rate for black men had been almost 20 points lower than black women. And so we couldn't attribute it to race, we couldn't attribute it to class, because the black male and female students, not only were they coming out of the same, cities, they were coming out of the same high schools sometimes, same streets sometimes, same households sometimes, and we found these big gaps. So what I did was we pulled together through the work in the office to look at a series of programs that were used at UConn and other places to increase chances for graduation rates. And we found that being involved in a research fellowship increased chances for graduation. So if you applied to a research fellowship, if you did study abroad, and this is a fascinating thing. We don't have time to get into all this right now, but we found that if you control for GPA and say 2 students come in with a 2.6 GPA, right? 1 studies abroad, they had graduation rates of about 93%. Those who did not study abroad were coming out at, say, a 70% graduation rate. So we found that just study abroad, and a lot of people when they first thought, study abroad students graduated, they almost always graduate. People are like, oh, that's because they come in more academically prepared. We turned out that they actually had the same GPA. We controlled for GPA and found that had that much of a win against their backs. So we said, what can we do to increase the win against the back for black male and Latino male students? Well, we actually focus on black male students because black male students have the lowest graduation rates. And we applied for and got a Booth Foundation grant for about $300,000 that helped us create the Scholars House, which to this day is in existence at UConn. We launched the Scholars House. Scholars House has been around for probably 6 years now. And the Scholars House, when we finally were able to look at the graduation rates, guess what the graduation rates were? Over 90%.
It went up tremendously.
I mean, actually, the graduation rates from, and we could double check this, the graduation rates for the students at Scholars House, which is almost all black male, if not all black male, exceeded UConn's graduation rate, right? Overall.
Wow.
So the thing is that there are things like study abroad, and so we also found that a Living Learning Center increases graduation rates. So if you put students, if they're involved in student organizations, if they are writing for the student newspaper, if they're president of the Political Science Society, or they're actively involved in those organizations, if they're involved in student government, they study abroad, these are things that increase graduation rates. So we want more black men to be involved in those sorts of activities on campus, and they exponentially increase graduation rates. I'm a first-gen student from South Central Los Angeles, right? My father died a couple weeks before I turned 13, right? I grew up and went to a private school and got no financial support from my household after my freshman year. Any way you look at it, statistically, I should not have graduated from Morehouse College in 4 years. I graduated 4 years. I didn't know this at the time. I was president of the History Majors Club. I was history editor of the Maroon Tiger newspaper. I pledged a fraternity. I went abroad between my sophomore and junior year, and I was a Morehouse College 4 Foundation Scholar. Those 5 factors, each one has a double-digit impact on graduation rates. I had no idea, but those sorts of things are the sort of the netting that captures students from falling, right? And so if you take someone who's disengaged from class, disengaged from the activities on campus, they're more likely to be like, oh, I'm gonna sit this semester out. But if you are called upon because you are the president of this particular organization, you got something to look forward to next semester. You got people relying on you to be a leader on campus, and you're much more intimately involved. You find excuses to stay on campus instead of, I'm gonna sit this semester out and come back next time. So as we know, when people sit out for a semester, it becomes 2 semesters, then 3 and 4, and before you know it, you're in your 40s thinking, "Wow, man, I wish I would have just stuck with it."
That's right.
I got a year left. How many people and I know that got a year left, 2 years left in college, they never went back. So those sorts of factors are important. And we found that if you could have interventions, those sorts of interventions work.
Well, Dr. Ogbar, you have shared a lot of wonderful positive outlooks regarding higher education, men of color, and your experience. And I am so looking forward to publicizing this interview. Finally, I'm looking at the time. I have like 2 minutes. Unless there is anything else left that you would like to share, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to just allow me to speak with you. I find you to be such a pleasant professional, such a positive academic, and you keep me calm.
Well, man, this is all mutual. Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor being here. I appreciate it. You're incredibly humble. You shine a spotlight on other people, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the platform. It was an absolute pleasure.
And we look forward to engaging with you soon. You take care, have a positive day, and you'll be receiving this information shortly. God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
All right, sir. Have a good one.